Was there a time, I'm curious, when you realized that, oh, I got to get better at this skill. I have to get better at this habit. Communication is something that has naturally happened as a family. Was there a time where like, I got to really improve here? And were there certain things you did to do that?
Oh, for sure. I would go over if I had an idea and I had something I really needed to communicate, I had to get better. And so what I found was you have to find out what the motivation is from the person you communicate, and that's important as well. And so I knew with people on my team, I was like, what matters to them most? And so I would go after that. Like my father, it wasn't necessarily money. It was more like what he wanted to do, like with hunting. And so I would communicate that with him. And even during the TV show, I remember he didn't want to do Duck Dynasty. My dad was like, no, I don't think it's going to work. And I said, well, if we have a bigger platform, I think we could get the gospel out more and share the word with more people. And that's what got him. He said, oh, okay, well, if that's the case, then I'll do the show. And so it's interesting. You got to know what it is. It wasn't like, oh, we could make some money. It's what motivates the person. And so everybody on my team and people in my family, I know what it is that they care a lot about. And so I can try to communicate to them in that way.
You cater to their different styles, their values. I love that. And one of their values you just mentioned is faith. Was that something that you early on said, hey, these are the values of our family, these are the values of everything we're trying to build? How did you start to build out those core values?
100%. You know, we've always gone on this motto. We have faith, family, and then, my dad says ducks. I mean, but that can be whatever it is, whatever your vocation is or whatever it is that you're into. But the key is you have to keep them in that order. Because what happens is the job will it'll start looking like it's number one. And it doesn't work like that. So what we found is our faith will help keep our family together. The family will help keep you have better peace and joy at work and whatever that is. And so when you keep those in line, that's what's worked for us. And because let's face it, I mean, if your family is struggling and there's problems at home, good luck when you're trying to do your job. You know, it's going to directly affect that. And so for us, we just always have to remind each other and say, hey, these are the priorities. So that faith, and then our family, and then whatever it is that you're into, your job or whatever.
Well, the Robertson family is famously known for the kitchen table and being very intentional with that quality time at the table. What power has that had in your life? How has that kind of shaped you and your family?
It's funny you mentioned that, because that kitchen table is like I remember as a kid when we sat around that same table and we didn't have anything. We were really poor but we were all around that table. And I've even said it was like an audition. It was almost like a stage, because at the time we had my grandparents, my dad's mom and dad, and then you had mom and dad. And as the kids, we didn't really talk that much. And if you said something, you had to bring it. You had to bring a good story. And so there was so much storytelling. There wasn't a lot of TV watching. We had like 3 channels, but it was more of these stories. And so we learned how to tell stories. I listened to stories, and my parents and grandparents had these amazing stories, and they would just tell these stories, and they were funny. And it's funny in life. That's what the TV show was all about. It's really about telling stories. It's about being a storyteller. And I learned that as a kid, sitting at that same table that we ended up having the show and the prayer around. So it was just amazing how we grew. And I remember Dad saying, like, boys, we're going to sell $1 million worth of these duck calls one day. And I remember thinking, like, how is that going to happen? Like, how would I didn't really understand. I thought, well, maybe, And but Dad was always a dreamer, and he would cast that dream out. And so it was fun whenever I became, the CEO of the company, was to be able to fulfill a lot of his dreams that he had for the business. I, had a better skill set to do that, but we all went together. And so it was amazing. It was all at that table. So many lessons learned. And we had, even in my family, we have to be intentional about sitting around the table, having dinner, telling those stories, because as life gets fast and a lot of families have just abandoned that, and they rarely ever sit together and have that meal and talk.
Yeah, it's one of the most powerful ways to communicate is in person. And now with technology and everything post-COVID, we've gotten away from that. And so everything is it's a message on Slack, it's a text message, it might be an email. Have you found that there's way more power and intentionality when you get to be face-to-face with people, communicating and sharing stories and laughing and breaking bread?
Oh, 100%. Even business-wise, how it was like we used to go, we'd have these meetings and you'd have dinners together, and that's where, I got a lot of my start was doing that, but there was that face-to-face contact. And we've abandoned that and it's just not near as good. And so what I find with my family is, so I'm a cook and so I cook food. And so if I cook the food, it's going to be on the table, and my family, my kids now who have their own kids, I draw them in with the cooking, which is another lost art as well and skill. Yeah. And so I was able to take that as well. And so it's been so fun because even my kids now, even in their businesses, they're like, hey, we've got so-and-so coming in. Dad, will you cook this meal? And I'm like, yeah, I will. And so again, it just draws together back to that setting, back to that family time, back to which is now our kitchen table, which is different than my parents. And so it's a beautiful thing, when we come together, have those conversations, and so much of that is just is lost, and then I think later as we get older, oh man, we really miss those times.